Hey everyone, you're here with Mark on Perfect Gardens TV. Please remember to check us out on the other social media channels. So, before I get into how to fix your yellow leaves, I thought it'd be interesting to talk about why do we get yellow leaves and to figure out the story. Like, how did we get there? Or why did we get there before we actually can figure out the proper diagnoses to treat the actual problem versus the secondary conditions that come from the primary problem. So, why can leaves turn yellow? Well, first, there can be a deficiency. There can be an excess. Your pH can be off. There could be man-made chemicals affecting your soil biology if you're growing in living soil. If you are using salt-based fertilizer, understanding the frequency of your watering and the frequency of your feeding, and also identifying how high your parts per million are, and once again, how often you give it to your plants. All of those factors are going to be part of the story of understanding why your plants are yellow in the first place. Then, kind of like pulling back that layer, then you're able to kind of dive in and also begin to look at, how the yellow is appearing in your leaves, right? So, for example, if the yellowing is starting on the bottom of your plant and it's working its way up, it's more than likely going to be a nitrogen deficiency. If you're using living soil and you start running into a nitrogen deficiency and you're using clean water, maybe you're already using drops balance, so it's remediating the chlorines and chloramines, and it's creating a healthy environment for your soil biology. So if you know that case in that situation, then you might want to possibly turn to something that's a little bit more liquid soluble, still in line with the values of your growing method. Because if you're using living soil, maybe you turn to blood meal because it's a little more water soluble as a possibility. If you're growing in with like a synthetic salt fertilizer and you're running into a nitrogen deficiency, well, you might want to check your parts per million, and you might be not feeding enough because everything's going to be reliant on what you're providing your hydroponic system. So especially if you're not using any bacteria in your hydroponic system and you're just providing, let's say, like the general hydroponics and PEK based nutrients. Well, I would look at your parts per million. Maybe you might want to increase it a couple hundred parts per million, and or possibly introduce a bacteria product. And also, if you're not using it already, that I talk about all the time, the drops balance, and then a bacteria product we recommend it is called BAM. We're going to be releasing some future videos of how to actually make BAM at your own home, so I highly recommend you check those out. But if you look at your nutrients, you know that your parts per million is already actually at a pretty decent level, and you shouldn't be running into a nutrient deficiency like nitrogen, then you might want to look at what is the pH of your water. The pH also, if the pH is off, you're going to be having other indicators besides just like a singular nutrient lockout or a deficiency. You're going to be having multiple things kind of going on if the pH is off. It's just kind of how that works. If the outsides of the leaves are starting to get necrotic yellow, right? So it's not, now we're shifting from the type of yellow, from your amino acids, which are the nitrogen, right, are being robbed from the oldest growth to the newest growth because there's a deficiency. And it's not like the plant's being damaged, it's just things, mobile nutrients is able to be taken from one part of the plant to the next part of the plant, right? Though, if you look at it when you're dealing with a potassium deficiency, that starts to appear more of like a necrotic deficiency around the tips of the leaves, going up and down the sides of the leaves. And it's a different type of yellow. Like I said, it's more of like a necrotic, the leaves are starting to die type of situation around the tips. In that situation, once again, you have to, if you're growing in soil and you're using a salt-based nutrients and you've been giving a decent parts per million, then I wouldn't try to increase your phosphorus or your potassium. And I say phosphorus and potassium quite often together because both of them are actually very water soluble. And more often than not, because they're very water soluble, they reflect in the plant similarly, right? So if you have excess phosphorus and potassium, they'll actually show up in the plant very similar, the same as an excess. But in the deficiency part, they show up differently. So I say these two interchangeably quite often. So anyways, going back over it to the potassium deficiency, If you're using soil and you know your parts per million are high already, then more often than not, because they're so water soluble, there's probably drybacks happening in the soil. And in that situation, you're not having a deficiency because of lack of, you're actually having a deficiency because of a lockout. Right. And so in that situation, the same situation, you're going to want to use drops of balance and BAM to help dissolve the salts and balance out the salts quickly, because there's a couple ways to handle it, right? If you just flush the pot, you actually have to refertilize the plant right after flushing the plant, because you just flushed out all the nutrients and all the enzymes that the soil also had in there. Right, because the bacteria of it doing a job. When you flush it, you flush all that stuff out, and it takes the bacteria 24 to 48 hours to rebuild those things back up. If you're not using bacteria, you still flushed out your salts, so you have to refertilize your plants back. That's why I'm not a big proponent of flushing your plants. If you do flush your plants, you might want to get a little bit of water runoff. That's a conversation of why you get a little bit of water runoff, and that's just as an indicator, lets your pot know it's fully saturated, not trying to flush water out, right? It's an indicator, not a reactive step to solve a problem. That's why I recommend drops of balance and BAM, because the bacteria in the drops of balance will increase the law of minimum threshold. And so instead of those salts getting dissolved and burning your plant, because that's why when you flush your plant, you want to get those salts out, right? Because if you don't, your plant's going to go from a deficiency to a toxicity super quick. And then when it goes to a toxicity, what ends up happening more often than not is you have elongation happening on the newest growth, and then you have calcium and zinc and magnesium get locked out, which then create different types of yellow in different parts of the plant, because the interveining of the leaf with the magnesium deficiency starts to turn slightly yellow or necrotic in a way. And then with a calcium lockout, what ends up happening is the calcium isn't being delivered to the newest growth of the leaf. So now you have kind of blotches starting to appear, not because the plant died in that section or something, it's because the calcium wasn't available when the leaves were stretching and growing, right? So, and then the zinc, again, zinc lockout, right? You're having magnesium, calcium, and zinc lockout, not deficiency, because of excess phosphorus and potassium salt. And that's why when you add in the drops balance, it increases the law of minimum threshold. When you have excess salts, it shuts down the bacteria. So you want to re-inoculate that super quick. Instead of it flushing everything out, you're kind of giving everything it needs to process it and use it appropriately. And then at that point, you want to just keep re-watering your soil appropriately and get back onto a natural rhythm. So again, through this whole conversation, I'm describing the problems of how yellow appears in different ways, from a deficiency to a toxicity, from a mobile nutrient to a slightly immobile nutrient, because we're talking about calcium, we're talking about magnesium, we're talking about nitrogen. I'm explaining how they're appearing, whether it's a deficiency, but how quick it can turn to a toxicity depending upon what you're using. If you're using salt-based nutrients, or if you're using dry amendments, this same situation can actually happen quite often in dry amendments, because bacteria do a great job at solubilizing dry amendments, right? And if you have inadequate watering practices and drybacks, those salts that the bacteria produce as enzymes every 24 hours through the enzymatic production cycle, they will, if you are inadequately watering or don't have a consistent watering experience, those salts will dry back, very similar to if you are using a salt-based fertilizer. And then the same experience happens where you have excess salt build up and nutrient lockout, and then you have all the salts become solubilized really quickly. Is maybe you flush or you finally do a decent watering, and then it causes toxicity and then lockouts another way. I talk about these quite often because these are the primary things that happen while growing. You might have a few other deficiencies and toxicities that appear, but the primary ones are going to be calcium, and calcium will appear as a deficiency, and more often than not, it's going to appear as a deficiency, and people are going to think it's a deficiency, and they're going to add more CalMed when that's not the appropriate thing. That it's going to appear more often than not because your VPD is off, and moisture is not flowing up the xylem at an adequate rate. And so because the plants grow so quickly and so fast, you're going to see blotches that appear because there's not enough calcium being delivered because your VPD is off. And or secondary, calcium is being locked out because you have an excess of phosphorus and potassium salts. And if you see a calcium deficiency with a magnesium deficiency or a zinc deficiency, you can almost guarantee it's an excess of salts were released because of phosphorus and potassium, right? Not because your VPD is off. If you have yellowing starting on the bottom of your plant and your amino acids are being robbed to the newest growth, well, you have more than likely there's a deficiency happening of nitrogen in your system. More often than not, then it's going to be a pH being off, because when you have a pH off, you're going to have more often than not, you're going to have more than one indicator happening as a deficiency or toxicity happening in the plant at one. And the plant's going to look funky too. So I know this video didn't give exacts. Well, it did actually. It gave exacts of what to look for, how to look for it, how to diagnose it. And my two primary go-tos I go to all the time is your BAM and your drops of balance. And then third, if you have the money for it, get a bottle of Organoshield, because Organoshield, it breaks down to water, CO2, and sugar. And that's also a key part of when you're having something go wrong. You want to boost up certain things to increase your laws of tolerance so that your plant keeps performing in zones of intolerance that you've subjugated your plant to because you're the grower. And ultimately, we have to take responsibility for how the plants look on a daily basis. Obviously, unless you're growing cheap genetics and or growing autoflower plants, because those are pretty finicky as well. All right, guys. Appreciate you guys. Have a wonderful day. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.